Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Agri-Works, the podcast, where we explore what's working, what's not, and what's next in agricultural communications and marketing. Each month, we'll interview key marketing voices in the industry, examine trends as well as tradition in marketing, because we all know farming is tied to tradition. I'm Liv, Head of Content at Agri-Works, and today we are kicking off with a topic that seems to be everywhere at the moment, and one that very much divides opinion: influencer marketing. So, does it really work in agriculture, or are there better, cheaper, and more authentic ways to get your message across? To dig into that question, I have spoken to two people with very, very different takes. First, we'll hear from Sandy Kirkpatrick. This was a conversation that could have gone on for hours, and a discussion I had to spend a very long time editing to get down to a podcastable length. We disagreed on a couple of things, which is always a good way to start a podcast. And it was great to get into the topic with someone who believes that influencer marketing often delivers less value than brands think, and that there are more cost-effective ways to achieve the same, if not better, impact. Then we'll have a chat from Lizzy McLaughlin, a creative marketer and podcast host who's worked in the influencer space herself. She argues that there is a place for it, when it's done thoughtfully and part of a wider strategy. So, two different perspectives, but one big question. Is influencer marketing really worth it in agriculture? Let's start with Sandy.
I'm Sandy Kirkpatrick. I run Farmstock, and that's a marketing consultancy for agricultural businesses who actually want to stand out and get noticed with their marketing. My background is I was born and brought up on our beef sheeping, or what was a beef sheeping dairy farm in Scotland until we sold the dairy about 15 years ago now. And then I lived down south, so I've always been involved in agriculture, but I did a stint in the drinks industry, in where, if you strip it back to its very core, it's a pure branding and distribution exercise, and you really saw the power of great marketing and great branding. And I think, particularly for me, one of the main drivers behind starting Farmstock really was to see more farm businesses succeed. And I think better marketing is one way in which we can help achieve that.
And I think in terms of sort of the topic of this podcast, what we're seeing at the moment is brands doing that through the use sometimes of influencers, and kind of we're edging into that real social media push and how we can utilise bigger names to help us. Yeah, what are your thoughts in terms of sort of where influencers fit within this?
I think that's a very interesting point, and probably the best place to start is, what do we consider an influencer?
Yes.
And
before we dive
into this is the first point that Olivia and I disagreed on, and it's a great start to this podcast because we're going to disagree on the first
absolutely.
Point. But I think so I think that's probably, so what's your take on that then? What would you say, what do you term an influencer?
I think it's not a straightforward thing, because if you drill it down to the word influence, it's anybody that has any kind of influence on people that might purchase or that side of things. So it can range from anybody you listen to. Yeah. However, in this context, I would class an influencer as somebody that uses their position and their following to influence decisions. Because I know we had the sort of discussion around the term that seems to be coming about now, which is content creator.
Yes.
And where the differences lie.
When you think about the word influencer, because, influencers have been about for ages, probably since the start of social media, but, they've been around for a long time. And I think, but this is where it differs in agriculture slightly, in the fact that, you love influencers in the beauty space, in the fashion space, in consumer goods and all this sort of stuff. I think there's a slight difference with agriculture in that you're not selling a £20 concealer. No. You are typically, the value and the size of product that is getting sold onto farms is of a much, much higher value. But I have noticed over the past few years that a lot of, let's for argument's sake say, influencers in the agricultural industry are rebranding themselves into this: I'm not an influencer, I'm a content creator. Yeah. And I think there is, I think in a lot of ways you're right, they're not two standalone terms. I think inherently they are joined to some degree.
There's overlap.
There is, and there always will be overlap. I was of the opinion that, again, if you're running off ad revenue and brand deals, that makes you an influencer. That for me is, look at where the money's coming from. If you're drawing enough ad revenue and brand deals, that puts you an influencer. Now, to be an influencer, you will obviously need to produce content. So that ties back into
That's where I think the overlap lies.
Yes.
Yeah, is that the reason you've become an influencer is you fundamentally started creating content, whatever that looks like.
Yes.
And that has built up your following because you produce very good content. I think there is, for me, the difference is if you're classing yourself purely as a content creator, you're either just doing it for the joy of it, you are creating for the audience you have, there's no paid partnerships, or you can become a content creator where it may simply be you are filming you opening a box of makeup, or I don't know how this transfers necessarily then into agriculture, but it's not you as the person that is the influence, it's how you can create something that is pretty and captivating rather than the being behind it.
But I think it sort of brings us on to the other point that we discussed, was the sort of rules and guidance around influencers. And I think this is where it gets even more convoluted or grey. There are guidance and rules that I think influencers should or need to follow. And to be quite blunt, I think in agriculture it's not really happening.
I think there is an element where the industry has been, I don't want to say slow to utilise them from a marketing sense, but it's not gone as quickly as the beauty industry where influencers are everywhere and it's actually very strict. Yeah. And I think a lot of those, in those spheres, a lot of influencers get pulled up very quickly when they're not mentioning that it is a sponsored ad or a paid partnership or any of those terms. I think there's probably an element where in this industry, they are all also farming. It's not the full-time job that it quite often becomes for a lot of influencers, where it becomes your main source of income. And I think there is a lot where I can see why content creator, that term is used, because actually probably 80% of what is being shared on social media is pure content. Yeah. And for content's sake, or for the sake of raising awareness, or just sharing what's going on in a day-to-day life. And the paid partnerships tend to be, on the whole, the much smaller amount. I
think you're right. I think that the lines are very much blurred. I think they are very much joined at the hip, particularly if you are looking at monetising that audience that you have, or if you are being approached by brands to do X, Y, and Z. I would say you're then into the influencer sphere. This, again, comes back to the point that I sort of going back and forward a little bit, that this is where, again, it gets grey, because there are rules and guidance on what content creators stroke influencers need to declare when it comes to a commercial arrangement and a brand deal. But I don't think, certainly from what I've seen in the industry, that very many of them are. I think we as marketing professionals within the industry really need to be challenging companies to say that if you are looking to go down this route and work or use influencers, then you really need to be holding them to account for what it is that to make sure that they adhere to the guidelines that's out there. And I don't think it should be left up to that individual, because ultimately, if they're not declaring it and they're not being open and transparent, then you will ultimately be guilty by association. And I look at a lot of the stuff online on social media these days, and I know for a fact that is a paid promotion, that is a commercial arrangement that's in place there, and it's not stated. And for me, that's a massive red flag in terms of both the individual, but also the brand that's using that influencer to promote it.
I think there needs to be far more focus on what the rules and regulations are around it, like there are in other industries where it is quite. I mean, it's strict everywhere. It transcends industries. But I think other industries are more aware of it and follow it to the T, because otherwise they're losing a lot out of it.
And a lot of people think that you only need to declare it if there's money being transferred. If I pay you £1,000 to promote my new drill, then
it has to be sponsored.
That's a sponsored post. And whilst that is true, there's a lot more to it as well. So the way that the rules are structured is that basically, if there is money, But if there's a product that's been exchanged without money, if there's any financial incentive, whether you've been invited for an all expenses paid trip to a factory in Germany, whether you have been given a product free of charge, anything gifted, any expenses paid, even if there's no money transferred, even if there's no obligation to post, as you say, if that post, be it a piece of machinery, be it clothing, be it whatever it is, that has to be stated as a commercial arrangement. And on all the platforms, particularly YouTube, TikTok, and I'm pretty sure it's the same on Meta as well, there is a box in which you can tick to say this is a paid promotion, this is a paid partnership. So the other thing the guidance says is that it has to be upfront in plain English before someone watches that piece of content. So you can't just
start of the caption at the start of every
so you can't stick it at the bottom of the description or leave it until 20 minutes to the end.
In all the hashtags right at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's a lack of knowledge. I think there is a...
From
I think across the board. I think...
From brands or from the influencers themselves?
Both. But I think it's because it's kind of very naturally come about in a much slower way than anywhere else that uses influencers. And I think the audience aren't holding anyone to account.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So I think it's just this kind of thing that's just feeding itself. I don't necessarily think there's anybody very consciously.
I'd agree with that, and I'm not going to sit here and say that it's my job or your job to do
No.
it. But I think
as a collective.
But as I say, I think as a marketing professional within the industry, we need to be challenging clients to make sure that they are aware. As I say, if I was a brand, if I was working in-house in a brand, and we were looking at using influencers, my first question, I'd really want to hold them to account, because if they don't, you are guilty by association. And that, again, for me, it erodes the trust, one, in the influencer, but two, in the brand and the product.
I think that's probably one of the conversations that I have when I'm working with brands and they ask about utilising an influencer, is very much, you do realise that it can't be as simple as they appear in content for you. It's got to be flagged that it is sponsored, because otherwise you lose the credibility of everything else that goes around it.
Of course you do.
So what would your advice then be to any marketing teams or any brands that are looking
to use an influencer?
I
think influencers, in terms of a marketing perspective, sit within an awareness piece. They sit within that top of funnel awareness for a campaign or for a particular product or service. Because, as I say, the vast majority of products that are getting sold into farm are of significant value. And again, this is where it differs in agriculture, because with the best will in the world, no one is going to watch a piece of content by an influencer reviewing a particular product or service and trust them so explicitly to go out and spend 60 grand on a new piece of machinery or whatever.
Because a lot of marketing and a lot of this kind of thing is down to trust.
Massively.
And there are some campaigns that I've seen, and there are some smaller businesses where they've clearly got a relationship with a brand because they've used it. They've always used it.
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
then, to me, is a natural fit. That I think that's where actually, if you have used a particular piece of clothing or a pair of boots or particular feed most of your farming life, and they approach you to say, or you as a brand, you've seen this, it feels perfect. Yes, I would. That's where I would say go for it.
I think it's very much around the awareness piece, and we saw Fendt do it recently with the release of their 800 series tractors. They've got a whole load of influencers, and that's a way of generating awareness. That the big thing about influencers, and I think one of the big strengths that they have, is that trust and credibility piece, in where they are, on the whole, the vast majority of the ones that I know or have seen online are farmers themselves. So they have a degree of credibility.
Yes.
And they have authority to talk on, milking parlours because they are a dairy farmer, for example. Caveating all that by saying that if an influencer isn't being open and honest and transparent with commercial arrangement and paid partnerships, then all of that trust and credibility is eroded.
Going back to sort of the whole trust element, and I think in our industry, it's very important. Farmers are sceptical, to say the least. So I think there is always that. They're much more likely to buy off another farmer or to take the recommendation of a friend. And I think because a lot of the influencers that we see sit in that circle socially, there is a risk on their part to not associate themselves with brands that they don't fundamentally
No, but you think it's a degree of credibility
yes. That I think there isn't necessarily in other industries because there's a lot of skin in the game.
Yes, I'd agree with that. And I think there is a degree of reputation that they'll need to uphold. As you say, fundamentally, it is a relatively tight-knit community in where, you're right, farmers are inherently sceptical and do place a lot of value on recommendations from friends and peers and people they see online. Again, my my sort of pushback from a brand perspective on that, from a company's perspective, is that every company out there has customers. User-generated content, on the other hand, is something entirely different. In where, as you say, you use your customer base to actually go out and you encourage your customer base to promote the product, and that can work really well. Yeah. I've done it a ton of times. I was out on last Monday. I was out getting a customer review for a machinery manufacturer, and where we went and spoke to one of their long-term customers, and the guy James, the farmer James, he was absolutely brilliant. He didn't have he's not even on social media, but he was absolutely brilliant because he sung to the rooftops about the quality of the product, a huge amount of credibility, and I think it came over so much better than just another face in the industry saying this is a great product.
I think when it is somebody that's used the product and likes it, and from what I've experienced doing case studies and interviewing farmers for testimonials, etc., is that they're bloody honest.
Well, yes.
So actually, you're sometimes sat there going, okay, what are you going to say?
Yeah.
And sometimes they will say something negative about the product, that it doesn't quite do this, but actually that makes everything great that they say about it far more trustworthy.
Well, there'll always be nuances, and certain products won't fit a particular farmer. I was out speaking to a farmer who was using a drill, and he said they've switched from a trail drill to a mounted drill because the trail drill was too bouncy on the road and they had to cover a lot of distance between fields and whatever else. So that's why they moved to the mounted kit. And brands might look at that and think, well, is he slagging off the trail drill? And I'm like, well, no, it's just an honest opinion based on their. And I again, coming back to what's the alternative to using an influencer? Well, again, go out and your customer base is the first port of call, but secondly as well as your employees, like employee generated content. We've seen some great stuff. I was thinking about in the road up in the car to here today is that I think as marketing professionals in the industry, I think we need to be challenging companies and clients more and really asking them, is this what you want to do? I look at it that clients will come to me and you, or they'll go to marketing agencies because they want help, they want to grow, they want to develop, and I think we need to be pushing back on that. Not pushing back, but we need to be challenging them to look at other avenues, to look at other strategies, other creative concepts. And so, as I say, part of my job is to try and encourage people
think outside the box,
to think a little bit differently and do something a little bit differently.
I really, really enjoyed that conversation with Sandy, and as I mentioned, it could have gone on for a lot longer. What I really appreciated and what I think is really important within this topic is looking at the rules and regulations, because agriculture, like every other industry, has to follow those advertising guidelines, in fact not guidelines, rules. And we need to make sure that when we are looking at utilising influencers that we follow those to the T, because everything we do is really fundamentally tied to trust and the trust of our audience and our clients or customers. And if we lose that, then we've lost everything. I also think it is really important when we're speaking about different types of marketing strategies to think about what is best. And some of the points that Sandy made about other avenues to go down, whether that's utilising your customers or your employees, are really key when you start looking down these kind of routes, is what works best for your brand. But as always, there is another side to this conversation, and it is one that very much recognises that the creativity, time and genuine connection can come from working with an influencer if it's the right one for you. So let's hear from Lizzy, who spent years helping agri brands build creative campaigns, and she's also been on the other side of the camera creating her own content and partnerships. I'm going to start with a bit of scene setting.
Okay.
So can you give me a bit of an intro and just background to sort of how you've got to where you are at the moment.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yes. Right. Scene setting.
Cliff Notes version.
Well, I'm not from a farming background. I grew up
Snap.
in a town, Middlesbrough, for most of my life, and
Good old northeast.
what can I say? And farming just wasn't really pitched to me as a career or something that I could get into. I always liked it as a kid, but for me, it wasn't something that was pushed in schools. So fast forward, I very much went down the creative route. So I studied English language and linguistics with media, and then did an MA in design because that's what I loved. And while I was doing my master's degree, I fell into a role as a marketing exec at a poultry equipment supply company.
Okay.
So as you can imagine, I was thrown into the world of chickens. If you've ever been in a shed of 30,000 chickens, there is a picture of me somewhere where I'm just like, hi, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing here. And I, hand on heart, said to myself, I'll be in this a year, I'll get some experience in marketing, and then I'll go off and do what I actually want to do.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do, I didn't really know, but I knew it was something with the media. And then I just fell in love with it. I realised what I thought farming was and what I'd kind of been fed in the town wasn't necessarily what farming was all about. And I became really passionate about kind of breaking down these stereotypes. I started pushing myself outside of kind of the role of just poultry.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, I then worked as a community and audience development editor at Farmers Weekly. So I then really branched out from poultry to more of the different sectors, so livestock, dairy, arable as well, and then moved to Agri-Connect, working as head of commercial content solutions. May sound familiar.
A little bit.
And now I work part-time as creative lead at Seeded Marketing, which is very much helping agricultural businesses with their content creation, with PR. And I do a podcast on the side.
So the theme of this particular podcast is very much around a conversation that we're hearing a lot about, and it's influences within ag marketing. I'm going to jump straight in. I want to start with the initial debate that I've seen, and I love to jump into it,
Go on.
is the terminology and influencer versus content creator.
I mean, that's a conversation, isn't it?
It is. It's a conversation that could take over a whole podcast, really.
Absolutely. So yeah, content creator versus influencer. I know there is a lot of kind of conversations around people thinking that influencer has negative connotations.
Which I don't understand.
No. So I'm very much kind of...
But maybe because I'm not one.
Well, I've been on both sides of it.
Yeah.
Would I coin and say I'm an influencer? I wouldn't necessarily go out and say that, but I can understand why people might say, well, you've got, about 30,000 followers. You are an
influence
influencer.
People, yeah.
And I prefer the term content creator because that's just kind of what I do. I create content. However, am I influencing people? I get messages from people saying, I've inspired them to start growing stuff in the garden or get on farm. So technically, if we're going down that technical route, influencer is what you're doing. I think, does it really matter what you to call yourself?
Absolutely.
If you're enjoying what you're doing, if it's eventually then going to lead into deals with brands or helping in terms of marketing, does it really matter? I'm not bothered by it.
No, and I think it is one of those, I think there's an element where potentially one becomes the other, that you probably start off content creating because you love it, you're good at it, and then it builds an audience, and then you sort of, without realising, one becomes the other, that you suddenly have this influence. But I'm with you that I think if you have the influence, embrace it, use it.
I think it's also got this kind of perhaps negative connotations in farming because of perhaps other industries. So when you think influencer, you might think makeup, cosmetics. But I'm also like, well, if you're making a career out of that,
absolutely,
great for you. And I think sometimes in farming, because farmers live and breathe their work and they're creating content around that, it almost feels like they can't position themselves as an influencer, or they don't want to.
It's just an interesting debate that seems to have come up really strongly recently.
I think you'll find though as well that the content creators themselves, or people in the farming sphere who are creating content and are perhaps working with brands, they may call themselves content creators, but you'll often find, or at least conversations I've had with businesses, they'll be like, oh, we're looking at influencers. So depending on where you are, whether you're doing the marketing or you are the content creator itself, that's where I'm seeing the kind of definitions.
Yeah, and that's what my next question was going to be. Do you feel that brands and marketing teams know the difference or have a view on the difference in terms of how they approach their campaigns and utilising content creators / influencers?
Interesting. So I think that if you're, let's say you're a brand and you're looking to work with somebody to do your content, if you were looking at kind of the PR route and kind of content down that side, that can also come under content creator, right?
Yeah.
But if you're looking for somebody with a social media following or perhaps a voice in the industry or a presence, I'm finding that demand in terms of kind of the marketing side, businesses coming around and going, okay, we're interested in it, but we're not sure how to go about it. Or we're interested in this, but we're concerned about the ROI. What's my return on investment? How much do do you know what there is? There's so many questions that I find businesses have. How much should I be paying an influencer?
Yeah.
Who should I be partnering with? What's it going to get me in return? Is there any guidelines I need for this? Do I need to draw up contracts? These questions are things that I've had on both sides. So being a content creator myself, I've had to, put forward my prices and my deals and contracts and what I want from it. But on the other side, helping businesses, I've also been able to say, well, actually, you need to put these in place.
Picking up on, because there's a lot of stuff to pick apart in that in terms of questions that are being asked. I'm going to start with something that I don't think is talked about often enough when it comes to influencer campaigns in this industry, which is the rules and regulations.
Interesting. In terms of kind of contracts?
Both, I would say, but probably more so on the you've decided to work with an influencer. They have got your product and they are posting.
Yes.
The guidelines around that.
You've got to understand, if you're being paid for something, they've got to put on their socials that it's sponsored. If you're gifted something, that's different again to something such as being paid to promote something. So you've got to have something very open about that.
And I think this is where there's been, I'm speaking to people that they've noticed that it isn't always happening.
Yeah.
And I think to some extent it's not been clear whether it's from a contract perspective or brand perspective, and it's as to what needs posting. And I think anything where you've been given a product or it doesn't even need an expectation to post. The guidelines are you need to flag it as an ad.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to flag that you've either been given it as goods in kind, or that you've been paid to promote this. Because, I mean, from both sides of it, you do want as a business to look authentic. If you're working with an influencer or a content creator, whatever we want to call this, you want to look authentic, and you want to, what you wouldn't want is down the line a backlash of going, well, you paid them to do that. We didn't really
we didn't know.
Yeah, and you could get yourself in trouble.
This is so the conversation that I'd had previously with Sandy about this was he's really keen on pushing actually what you have to do from a sort of advertising authority perspective. It's not just a should do, it is a law.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually forgetting the fact that it is a law, on both sides, you are a brand or a person dependent on trust of your audience.
Absolutely.
And as soon as you lose that, you can say goodbye to a lot of other stuff that's tied to it. And I think as an industry, well, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on how we make sure that happens as an industry.
I think we need more support in terms of it would be nice if, because as you say, farmers especially, if they end up becoming these content creators, they haven't necessarily set out to do that.
No.
So how would they know the kind of rules and regulations without just picking it up as they go?
Yes.
Perhaps we could have workshops on this more, or more conversations like this we're having, so people can listen to it. But also from a brand perspective, I think before you dive into that, speak to an expert. They've been in that world, or they've done that job, or they've experienced it. have a chat. Then you're
Yeah.
not gonna, you're gonna learn a lot of valuable things from a conversation like that.
Absolutely. And I think it then sort of leads on to this whole conversation about, and it sort of crosses over into social media in general, the view of paid ads. And I think there's a bit of a hesitation that people are switching off from those posts that are highlighted as a sponsored post, ad, whatever term you want to put to it. Do you think that's the case?
I think it very much depends how the content comes across. So for me, if you have something that looks very much like an advert, whether that be, a social media post that is graphics that looks like buy me now, buy one, get one free.
Yeah.
How many times do you look at a web page or you look at social media and you see an ad and you flick past it because you don't want to see it? You just kind of we have these blinkers towards them. But if it's an actual video or something that has that product or that message in there that's authentic to what they're already doing, you're going to buy into it because you believe it. You believe in that person, you believe in that ethos. And I think that is a massive lesson I'd like people to take away from this is align yourself with somebody who resonates with your ethos, your goals, and your authenticity as well. Because if you just partner with anybody because they've got a massive following, people will just see straight through that.
Absolutely. I think from my perspective, consuming content, I'm not put off by something that says an ad if it engages me.
Absolutely.
I like the fact that I know it's an ad. I like that I'm going into it knowing I am being sold something. I like that awareness. But actually, it doesn't make me switch off if the content within it is good and what I want to see. So from that, what would your advice be to a brand that's looking to work with an influencer content creator? Where would you suggest they start?
I would start with knowing what you want to get out of it, first of all. So what is your aim? Is it brand awareness? Is it more sales? Is it, what you're trying to achieve? Put some ideas forward of who you think would be a good fit for that. But then I would honestly seek out some expert advice around this. Personally, I just think having that kind of lending ear who can go, actually, do you think about this or have you thought about this? Don't focus on numbers solely.
Yeah.
If you go into it and go, do you know what? I want to use this person because they've got 150,000 followers. My first question would be why? Why?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just because you think that number is going to gain you X amount of traction? Well, actually, working with micro-influencers, for instance, who have under 10,000 followers, well, their engagement rate could be much higher than somebody with 150,000. And what you want is to reach a targeted audience that is got active, going to convert into something that you are looking for, whether that be sales or brand awareness or whatever, click-throughs. So yeah, I wouldn't just focus on numbers. I would look at engagement, authenticity, and kind of look at that.
No, absolutely. And I think it goes into sort of a separate conversation with marketing on vanity metrics. I think they're very tied to high numbers, meaning great campaign. But actually, if you go to an influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers, they're all in America and your client base needs to be UK, it's not actually helping you.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that you need to look into the data and budget, because actually some influencers are getting expensive if they have that high engagement rate, that high follower count. You need to really know why you're doing it. And is that return on investment going to happen?
And I think you've got to have that strategy.
Yes.
Because you can go to an influencer and they may say, right, I want X amount paid to me for this. And do you know what? If they've gained that following and they've got that trust, rightly so, they should be charging for what they're worth. I don't dispute that whatsoever. But I do think you need a strategy of, this is why we're working with them, this is what we want out of it, and this is what my end goal is. Otherwise, you're just kind of, it's like throwing money at an advert, isn't it? And hoping something sticks. You've got to have a strategy of, how does this fit into my wider campaign? How does this fit into my goals and my market strategy?
Very much down to that trust and authenticity again when you choose an influencer. Looking at the kind of content that goes naturally.
Yeah.
And it goes to talk to what we just said about not being too worried about it staying paid out. It actually fits in with both the brand and the influencer. it sits naturally within like content frameworks.
Absolutely.
Sort of the match made in heaven side. What kind of misconceptions do you think there are about working with influencers? This is coming from your other brain, not necessarily the marketing brain. What do you, as someone with a following, what do you think?
Misconceptions. That it's easy. That it's easy. All you do is take a video and put it up. There is a lot of thought that goes into this. Especially from my side of things, you know, I've got the edit, I've got film, keeping up with trends. It's not easy. I love it. Don't get me wrong. A lot of the stuff I do, I'm naturally drawn to anyway, being in the garden, homegrown, but then also being far. So yeah, it's definitely not easy. I think often tarnish with a brush that is like, oh, well, all they do is sit out and just make videos all day.
Which I guess is where the money you charging for what you do is important, because it is
absolutely
the job.
I think there's misconceptions around kind of the money side of things and financial of, you know, are you getting paid for every post? How does it work in terms of kind of brand deals? Do you just say yes to everybody? I know personally for myself, when a business wants to work with me, I have to make sure that their kind of ethos aligns with myself. I've got to make sure our aims are the same. I don't just endorse everybody. And if I did endorse everybody, I'd lose my authenticity.
And I think this is where, and I can to some extent see that conversation about influence versus content creator comes back in the ag industry, is that it's such a close-knit community. Yeah. It's a far cry from the beauty industry, clothes industry and influencers where they are taking brand deals left, right and centre, and there's not any of that worry in terms of authenticity to the same level, because you have got farming content creators who live, socialise, thrive in the industry that they are.
And everybody knows everybody.
So you have to align yourself to brands that you truly believe in. Yeah. Which gives them an added level of trust. And I think it does make this industry quite special from that perspective. Yeah. What do you think's next in digital marketing space? What do you think is next?
Oh, good question. What is next?
Because if you think about it in other industries, I feel like it's almost coming away from your core influencer to micro influencers, user-generated content, and less dependent on big names.
Yeah, I could see that. Just because, I mean, because the farming sector is so tight-knit, you do have some real key players in terms of large following, which, you know, are doing a fantastic job. But there are a lot of emerging new farming kind of voices who perhaps don't have that massive following, but are doing some incredible things. So I do think there's going to be more for kind of that micro-influencer space for more of those kind of partnerships and relationships. Do I think it's all going to stay on kind of... I think things are still going to go digitally as well. I think, I mean, you'll know yourself working in the role you do, that print is still there. Very much so, and still very much needed. But the digital side of stuff is really taking off. So are we going to have more kind of influencers doing a lot more kind of digital videos, podcasting, that type of thing? There are a lot of podcasts coming out now.
I've listened to about 3 on my way here.
Yes, a lot of podcasts coming out, and a lot of them using kind of these content creators and social medias as well, social media influencers. So can I see them being leveraged on that? Yes. And maybe creating some kind of new products around that where people are looking for that information rather than just going to traditional routes such as in a magazine or scrolling on a new path and life.
So I've had loads of conversations about, from a marketing perspective, to use an influencer or to not use an influencer. And there's a lot of different opinions out there. We've had a previous conversation that was part of this podcast that kind of touched on the fact that you need to be careful with your budget, and that there are some influencers that do cost, quite rightly, a good chunk of money. And that actually your marketing should essentially spend better elsewhere if you are trying to budget.
Yes, okay.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, okay. I think that's a fair point. You know, you do always have to have budget in mind because you are spending it and that is your strategy. But there's kind of I suppose, a misconception here about how much it will cost to have an influencer. Don't get me wrong, as you say, there are some influencers with huge following, massive engagement, who are going to be charging a lot of money. Rightly so. They've built that up. They've built that brand. I wouldn't suggest that. Don't. But there are also other opportunities with that kind of micro who are under, maybe 10,000 followers, who have really good engagement, but are looking to build themselves and their brand as well.
Yeah.
So rather than it being a financial opportunity, it's perhaps a partnership opportunity where you are giving them something in return and vice versa for their followers. So whether that is, they could be testing something on farm that they're really excited to do and that could build their following as well. It could be partnering with them on an event that you're doing, for instance, and get them there and it gives them a speaking opportunity or something like that. I think there are ways to work with influencers without necessarily spending a fortune, because especially, from an opposite side, not just from a market side, from my own content creation, there's times I've done, I've taken on deals which haven't been paid because I've seen the benefit from both sides. And this is going to help me grow my presence and position me as perhaps a thought leader or position me as in front of a new audience. That's benefiting me as well. So yeah, I don't think you always have to spend. I can totally see why people might think that you can spend your budget elsewhere, but it's also looking at other ways that you can both get something out of a partnership and not just money.
Thank you very much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
What's been really lovely about chatting to Lizzy and Sandy is the balance that it brings to this debate and this conversation. Lizzy very much has highlighted that influencer marketing isn't all about big spends and sponsored posts. It can be on that collaborative side, the creativity and the really understanding your audience. But the one thing, and I find this really interesting, that was touched on in both of these is the debate around the terms that we use. And it feels really relevant now because I'm seeing, it might just be the space that I've landed in on social media myself, but I'm seeing these conversations coming around time and time again on what we refer to those in the content space as. I think prior to looking into it myself and having some of these conversations, I was very much of the opinion that once you get to that stage, especially if you are using your platform to sort of promote brands or even just promote your own views, what you do to a larger audience, you are an influencer. The recent Wilson and Ashley podcast really went into this topic, and I think it was based on a post from the Social Farmhouse that has sort of highlighted the fact that influencer is a bit loaded of a term and has some negative connotations, especially in the social media scene at the moment, where we can see some newer influencers apparently buying followers and engagement, which I think muddies the water massively. I think, and this has sort of been touched on in the conversation I had with both Sandy and Lizzy, is that in this industry, the content that's being created purely for either the joy of creating it or from an educational perspective to share what goes on in day-to-day life on a farm is 80% of what content creators or influencers are producing. And therefore I can understand why actually if only 20% is paid partnership and making money from it, why you might want to distance yourself from certain terminologies that potentially have more negative connotations as this world adapts and changes, and it's changing quite rapidly, especially in agriculture at the moment, that we're going to end up in these debates and we're going to be really analysing what we can get from a marketing perspective. And I think all of it comes down to the knowledge that you need to have and the data that you need to have behind some of these campaigns. So if you are thinking of working with an influencer, content creator, pick your title accordingly, is knowing whether they are right for your brand and the audience or customer that you're looking to attract. It's looking at the data of their engagement and whether they have the right following for you. And I think as soon as you start looking into that, you'll very quickly see those that are genuine and are working really hard in that sphere versus those that are looking for a quick win. A huge thank you to our guests for joining me and being so open and honest about their thoughts and their experiences. It's really what helps drive these conversations forward. To keep up with all things Agri-Works and the podcast, you can follow us on social media platforms. We are Agri-Works on both LinkedIn and Facebook, or AgriConnect_Agri-Works on Instagram. If you have any questions about this episode or any suggestions for anything in the future, please send us a message. You can DM us on socials or find our email addresses on the website. You can also visit our website www.agri-works.co.uk, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening to so that you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening. I am Liv and this is Agri-Works the podcast. Until next time.